Hello everyone, welcome to our presentation, Silicon Valley Communication Foundation, a study of how ineffective conflict management impacts an organization, put together by Christy Bell, Cody Dunn, and Huang. We will begin this presentation with an overview of the article. Then we will focus on deeper analysis of the main characters' behaviors. We will then discuss the two models of conflict styles and how the safety valve for the employees failed in the organization. We will conclude our presentation with our recommendations going forward and discussion questions for you to reflect upon during the week. On May 11, 2018, New York Times published the article Inside a Powerful Silicon Valley Charity, a Toxic Culture Festered by David Gelf. Founded in 2006, the Silicon Valley Community Foundation has become the local charity of choice for tech industry executives in the Bay Area. In 2018, April 18th, the Chronicle of Philanthropy reported alleged sexual and workplace harassment by the organization's number 2 executive, Mary Ellen Loggins. The very next day, Loggins resigned. Later that month, on April 26, CEO Emmett Carson was placed on paid administrative leave. And shortly after that, on June 27th, Carson ended his employment with the organization. The article talked about the toxic culture that existed within the organization, described how a perfect storm of the chief fundraiser, Mary Loggins' bullying, and their CEO, Carson's avoiding approach to avoidance of conflict, and the HR department's unwillingness to intervene that enabled the existence of a workplace environment that employees described in the article as the worst, oppressive, and smothering. This pervasive environment drained employees' motivation, led to high turnover, caused potential donors to take their contributions elsewhere, and eventually embroiled the organization in a damaging public scandal. Mary Loggins' behavior within the workplace was that of a bully. In our textbook, the authors define bullying as repeated and persistent negative actions directed toward one or more individuals that involve imbalance and create a hostile work environment. Loggins seemed to be operating under potency bias, the assumption that interactions with others are contests to establish dominance versus submissiveness. We also see the bad apples effect on Loggins, who may even be destroyers of team processes and effectiveness through their persistent negative behaviors and communications. As a result of her actions, the organization was in a constant state of relationship conflict, which the author defined as disagreement based on personality differences or difference in norms and values. Our other character, Emmett Carson, the chief executive of the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, initially said he was unaware of Loggins' behavior, but later recanted and took responsibility after employees called him out on Twitter. As noted in the article, it was widely believed that Carson knew about Loggins' abuses but turned a blind eye. Whether he did so because Loggins was getting results through his own inability and unwillingness to confront her, or a combination of both, is unknown. What is clear is that Carson failed his organization. By employing an avoiding approach to conflict, Carson enabled Loggins to run roughshod over an entire organization. Many employees reported a prevailing belief that the foundation cared more about fundraising than about its own professed values of inclusiveness, integrity, and respect. Loggins was a symptom and beneficiary of this bias. She was a gifted fundraiser, and many employees reported feeling that the CEO and board ignored her abusive management style to gain the benefit of her fundraising skills. All this points to motivated blindness as a factor in Carson's choice not to hold Luoyuan accountable for her behavior. Next, Cody will walk us through the two models of conflict styles.
The story of the dysfunction at SVCF is largely a story of mishandled conflict. On the left side of this slide, you'll see the basic model of conflict styles provided in our textbook. This is helpful, but it doesn't tell us much about why an individual would choose a particular conflict style in any given situation. One of the most interesting things about the conflict at SVCF is that it took place across various levels of the organization, and as a result, we wanted to explore how power imbalances and conflict may have affected the way things played out. The theoretical framework we use to explore this dynamic comes from a 2013 paper called Navigating Conflict and Power at Work by Coleman, Kugler, Mitchinson, and Foster. Their three-dimensional model of conflict styles appears on the right side of this slide. On the vertical axis, we have relative power. The higher we move on this scale, the more power a person has in a conflict. The horizontal axis represents goal interdependence. Basically, are we cooperating or competing with one another? Finally, the depth axis addresses the total degree of interdependence between the parties in conflict. Essentially, am I stuck working with this person, or can I put some space between us? The model shows that when it's possible to disentangle yourself from the conflict, the expected response is autonomy, which lines up with the avoiding style as described in the textbook. If that isn't an option, people tend to adopt one of four behaviors. If they have the upper hand and your goals are in line with the other person's, your expected response is benevolence, using your power for the common good. In this case, the person with less power responds by supporting your efforts. If you have the greater power and perceive yourself to be in competition with someone else, however, you will employ dominant behaviors to get your way at the other person's expense. The expected response for someone with less power in that situation is appeasement. Integrating these insights with the model from the textbook, the high-power approaches of benevolence and dominance are essentially forms of the forcing style, while the low-power approaches of support and appeasement exemplify the accommodating style. One implication is that power imbalances make it more difficult for coworkers to adopt the more effective styles of compromising and collaborating. So with those models in mind, let's look at how every safety valve that should have supported the employees at SVCF failed them. With Luoyuan's adopting a forcing or dominating style, one-on-one conflict resolution wasn't going to work. Eventually, many employees grew tired of trying to appease her and chose autonomy. They left the organization. More than half of SVCF's staff quit or were fired in 2016 and 2017. Carson, the CEO, abdicated his responsibility to performance manage Luoyuan's. He chose to avoid necessary conflict with his star performer. Next, the HR department also failed SVCF's employees by accommodating Carson's commitment to protect Luoyuan's. In fact, when one employee went to HR with her complaints about Luoyuan, she was told, "It's either you or Mary Ellen, and Mary Ellen isn't going anywhere." Finally, the board, which is ordinarily a vital part of a strong and healthy nonprofit, was all but absent. Their ignorance of the true state of the organization allowed Carson to face no consequences for years. So what can we learn? At an individual level, it's important for leaders to be aware of the influences of power imbalances on conflict styles. Power imbalances are largely unavoidable, but research suggests that leaders can reduce stress levels for their subordinates and foster healthier approaches to conflict by acknowledging the power dynamics in play and empowering their colleagues to work with them in collaborative ways. Leaders must also accept their responsibility to hear and, more importantly, take action on reports of unacceptable behavior. And both personal and public reflection are vital in these processes. From an organizational standpoint, there are also several lessons to learn. First, every organization needs leaders who are strong advocates for their employees in multiple positions. At SVCF, this would have included the HR director as well as, you would expect, the CEO and the board. Second, organizations should have a formal complaint process that's documented, confidential, widely publicized, and effective. At SVCF, employees should have known they could contact the board if the CEO and HR would not provide redress. Finally, senior decision makers have to make an effort to routinely walk among the people of the organization. They need to learn about what's going on not only by reading reports, but also by making themselves present and paying attention. This could have saved both the employees and the foundation a lot of pain. So with all this in mind, here are two questions to guide our discussions this week. How do you think the HR director at SVCF perceived her relative level of power in the organization? How does your relative level of power in a conflict affect your choice of conflict style? And are there any team dysfunctions in your current work team that you need to address? If so, what are some practical ways you can deal with those challenges? Finally, here are references for further research. For convenience, you can find a PDF of the extra article we referenced in the Google Drive folder we've shared. We hope you enjoyed this week's discussions.